The Mediterranean, the cradle of human civilization. To the east, the cuneiform script of Sumer. To the south, the pyramids of Egypt. To the north, the gold of the oldest human culture known today.
Scientific facts confirm the uniqueness of the people who lived in the southeast of Europe in the millennia before Christ.
The most indisputable one is the Varna golden treasure, created in the 5th millennium BC, long before the peoples from Mesopotamia and Egypt had started processing gold.
The first Europeans who lived here left to us the largest and richest necropolis on the continent. The archaeologists retrieved more than 6 kilograms of 23-karat gold in 300 graves on an area of 10,000 square meters.
20 years prior to the discovery of the Varna treasure, and only 200 kilometers to the west of it, in the village of Hopnica, the scientists had discovered processed gold.
In a settlement dated about 6th millennium BC, archaeologists excavated a pile of golden items weighing 350 grams in total. It is presumed that these are occult items used as amulets or for a connection between the priest and the ancient gods.
This valuable find is kept at the Archaeological Museum of Veliko Tarnovo.
The Archaeological Museum of Wraca is the place where the third proof of the high cultural level of the most ancient Europeans, a clay tile with scriptures from the village of Gradeshnica, is kept.
Dated from the middle of the 4th millennium BC, it is from the same time of the cuneiform scriptures on the clay tiles of Mesopotamia.
A similar tile was found on the land of today's town of Kırgılı. It is exhibited in the local archaeological museum.
An undisputed fact of the advanced culture on the Balkans is also the clay seal from Karanovo.
Centuries older than similar seals discovered on the island of Crete, it is to a certain extent their prototype.
The mound near Karanovo, where the seal was discovered, is an area inhabited for thousands of years. More than 240 generations have lived here. The Karanovo mound is described in all archaeology books in the world.
The archaeological finds prove clearly that the people inhabiting the Balkans in ancient times played a leading role not only on the territory of Europe, but in the world too.
Sadly, contemporary mankind knows almost nothing about the most ancient culture on the European continent. Ever since antiquity, Egypt has served as a point of orientation in human history.
For antique historiography, Egypt becomes and remains the place where the teachings about the divine and immortality start, where worshipping the gods and the knowledge about communicating with them originates from.
Incomplete knowledge of ancient historiographers and bias of contemporary scholars makes us look towards Egypt in this story.
Today, we have some direct evidence available of the earliest contacts of Egypt with the people living on the Balkans.
The first undoubted evidence of exchange of people and ideas between the two opposite coasts of the Mediterranean are from the end of the 2nd millennium BC.
Then serious climate change happened, which resulted in migration of large groups of people from the Balkans all over the eastern Mediterranean.
In the 12th century BC, even Ramses III entered into a severe conflict with the so-called maritime peoples. According to sources of that time, the Palasata, the Cheker, and the Danuna were some of them.
According to the ancient tradition, it is the Pelasgians who preceded the Greek tribes in settling the Balkans. One can say that the Pelasgo-Cheker coalition, which attacked Egypt, is part of the Thraco-Pelagian ethno-cultural community. The tribes were depicted on the walls of Egyptian temples with their attire, hairstyle and weapons. The Danuna are believed to be the same which Homer referred to as Danaians.
As a matter of fact, the Thracians were first mentioned in writing by Homer in the Iliad.
Together with them is their king Rhesos, Hionas' son. I myself caught a glimpse of his horses, huge and very nice. They are whiter than the snow and dash like the wind. In gold and silver shines his new chariot. There is also great gold armor, most wonderful. It is not fitting for a mortal to wear such armor. It superbly matches the immortal gods.
Homer not only mentions the Thracians, he admires their horses, chariots and weapons in the Battle of Troy.
South of the Dardanelles and 30 kilometers from Çanakkale, there is a large alluvian plain and the Hisarlik hill itself where the great Trojan War took place. Here, the 200-year battle between the Achaeans and the Trojans was fought. Here, Achilles achieved his glory and Hector lost his life.
This place became the first large-scale historic battlefield where the Thracian tribes had fought.
According to some scholars, me being one of them, the Thracians were the indigenous people on the Balkans and had accepted many strangers among them, mainly migrants from the north and northeast.
Thracian dynasties ruled over vast territories, from the Aegean coast south to the Carpathians north, from the Black Sea coast and the Dnester rivers east to the perpendicular of the rivers Morava and Varda west.
The Thracians inherited the culture of the people who left their mark through the Varna and Hotnitsa treasures, the tablets of Gradeshnitsa and Kırgeli, and the seal from Karanovo.
And as if to prove the Thracian inherited skill for processing gold, decades after the finds in Varna and Hotovo, archaeologist Martin Christoph discovered yet another treasure in the area of the village of Debene.
The find has been dated back to the 3rd millennium BC. The golden dagger, the bronze knife, the silver box, and the tens of thousands of golden beads are evidence of the unquestionable talent of the ancient masters, which gives scientists a reason to rethink Europe's earliest history.
Apart from processing gold, the 5th to 4th millennium BC culture was also characterized by the massive use of idols, whose production and worship lasted until the 12th century BC.
The Mount Necropolises are also proof that one and the same people lived on the Balkans for more than 4,000 years.
Which appeared on our land in the 4th millennium BC and continued to be used until the Romans came to the Balkan Peninsula.
Evidence of the old custom to build mounds is provided by the grave of a man buried with a dog, discovered in the center of the town of Lovich.
This site is the only one of its kind discovered on Bulgarian territory. The grave is dated Middle Bronze Age.
3 clay pots, a spiral pendant made of gold, a bronze dagger and a golden rivet were found in the grave.
Particularly important is the fact that the grave was covered with layers of soil and stones, laid in a way that is reminiscent of a dome. There is no doubt that the grave was covered with a mound. This gives us sufficient grounds to believe that the inhabitants of our land from the 3rd millennium BC to the 12th century BC were the same. And since the population in the 12th century BC was Thracian beyond any doubt, we should accept that in earlier times the inhabitants of this land were Thracians.
In the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC, the Achaean tribes moved through the Balkans. Either through peaceful coexistence or through wars, they mixed with the Thracian tribes and the peoples on the islands in the Aegean Sea.
The Achaeans were Indo-Europeans who came to Europe from Central Asia. They adopted a large part of the Thracian and Aegean culture, which in the middle of the 2nd millennium BC gave birth to the Cretan Mycenaean Thracian culture.
It flourished in the southern part of the Balkans between the 16th and the 12th century BC and became known by its shortened name Mycenaean culture.
The Mycenaean castle forts, as town-type centres, are a manifestation of a centralised military bureaucratic monarchy. The Mycenaean texts unequivocally point to the divine essence of the king. After the king's death, he would be embalmed and his face would be covered by a gold mask.
Precisely burial gold masks are yet more proof of the participation of the Thracians in the creation of the Mycenaean culture.
It is known that the Thracians made the same burial masks that the famous Schliemann discovered in the royal burial tombs in Mycenae.
In the museum in the town of Kırgeli, for instance, part of a golden mask is exhibited dated 15th-13th century BC. It was discovered near the village of Tatul. The piece is approximately 4 centimeters long and is made from high-carat gold plate.
What is more, the Thracians continued to bury their dead with gold masks long after the Hellenes stopped doing that.
One of the examples of that is a golden burial mask found in 2004 in the Svetice mound by Dr. Georgi Kitov.
We found a royal burial with a gold mask depicting a severe-looking man. He had a golden seal ring depicting a spear-bearing warrior. In addition, we also found a full set of armaments, as well as silver, bronze and ceramic pots.
This shows that the Thracians not only had contacts with the Mycenaean culture, in fact, they created it.
Undisputed proof of that is the Vulchitran ritual dinner set found near the town of Pleven.
The Vulchitran ritual set is kept in the Bulgarian Archaeological Institute, with a museum situated in the center of Sofia. The set is made of pure gold and weighs 12.5 kilograms.
Created between the 15th and the 14th century BC, the Vulchitran treasure is the largest treasure from the Mycenaean age in the world.
We also need to point out that the Thracian myths formed the basis of the Greek mythology, where many of the gods and heroes have Thracian origins. the 7 Muses, Apollo, the god of war, Ares, the god of the underworld, Hades, and his wife, Persephone, and others.
At the end of the 2nd millennium, Dorians, Indo-European tribes speaking Greek, invaded the Balkans and the Mediterranean. In assimilating the Mycenaean Thracian culture, as well as the island culture of the peoples in the Aegean Sea, later on they created the Hellenic culture.
The Thracians had no script. Their inscriptions were either in ancient Greek or with ancient Greek letters. For us, the latter remain indecipherable, as it is very hard to analyze the words and establish what exactly the ancient people meant. It is the same when a Bulgarian writes in Bulgarian with Latin letters and the internet, and a person who does not speak any Bulgarian has to understand what it means.
Indeed, the Thracians did not leave any written record regarding their way of life. Knowledge was transferred without the written word, in the family, in the professional groups through special rituals, in closed esoteric societies, and through the universally accessible rites.
This type of culture is very conservative, and the accumulated knowledge is preserved longer and better than in the literary cultures. Rules in a community without a literature are much stronger and are obeyed in a much stricter manner.
The lack of Thracian written tradition, however, gave an opportunity to the foreigners, mainly Egyptians and Romans, to describe them to the next generations.
And to what extent were the authors fully objective, we can judge from the writings of Xenophontus, who lived in the 5th century BC.
The Thracians are our enemy.
Which does not prevent Plato from admiring them for having learned from them that
as the eyes separated from the head and the head separated from the body, no one must attempt to heal, so the body separated from the soul cannot be healed. Of all that feels unwell, a part cannot feel better.
Actually, the name Thracians is a local one. It was adapted to the ancient Greek language, and the origins cannot be accepted categorically yet.
According to one interpretation, it derives from Troy, Trojans, and Teucrians, the tribe which populated the lower Maritsa River area and the eastern Rhodope Mountains.
According to Herodotus, the Teucrians had their customs.
At birth or death, they do the following. When they gather round the newborn child, the family mourns over the evil it has to confront now it has been born, and speak of all human pain. Whereas the dead man is buried with cheers and joy, happy they speak of the evil he has now been saved from, by going to a place of total bliss.
Herodotus wrote about yet another strange custom of the Thracians. They tattooed their bodies because
being covered in scars is thought to be noble, the lack of these scars as not noble.
This privilege of the aristocracy was confirmed by Artemidoros, who wrote that
in Thrace, the children of the rich are marked. The more colourful signs they have on their bodies, the more cherished they are by those who carry them, and the nobler the families from which they come.
we should not forget that Thracian masters tattooed the Great Mother Goddess, as seen on the knee pads found in the Mogilan Mound and Agigyol.
According to another interpretation, the name Thracian meant bold and courageous, and was understood by the Greeks to mean savage and reckless.
Here are some wild Thracian customs as described in Euripides' play Andromache.
A man is connected to many women and gives them his bed in turn.
Regarding the wild habits of the Thracians, Plato added,
the Thracians drink undiluted wine, both their women and they themselves, and in pouring it over their clothes, they believe it a ritual of joy and good luck.
Ancient authors commented about another custom that was good and bringing happiness: gifts.
Every act of the Thracians involved gifts. The gifts possessed personal and dangerous spiritual power. They entailed reciprocity and were even obliging.
Refusing to take a gift or to give one equaled refusing to be part of the community, and due to this reason, each new owner did not try to keep the gifts for themselves, but rather give them to somebody else.
The most significant thing was that giving to each other meant that together with the gift, the receiver got some of the success and happiness of the giver. A sense of sharing and being part of the community was developed.
The so-called royal gifts were charged with particular power and symbolism. The best example for such gifts is the golden treasure from Panagyrishte.
The treasure from Panagyrishte is not only pure gold. This precious dinner set was used for some ritual purposes. Lately, I have become more and more inclined to believe that it served for inauguration in the mystery of Kabiris, the great gods of the isle Samothraki. What did this mystery promise? Most likely, it promised immortality. It promised a happy life after death. The amphora riton was most likely used in the brotherhood rituals. The two kings placed their fialas under the two openings on the bottom and toasted with wine mixed with their blood, which established a social contact, much stronger than any next of kin or other relationship. On the other hand, the two openings of the amphora are designed as Negro heads. The large golden fiala is also covered with Negro heads, one of the largest fialas in the ancient world. We should not forget that the Kabiris were believed to be black, so the black Kabiris, the Ethiopians, are representatives of the Golden Age. They were closest to the gods. This is why the Negro heads appeared on the set.
The Rogozin ritual gold vessels are symbolically close to the Panagyrishte treasure, the largest Thracian treasure found so far.
It was found by chance in 1985 in a vegetable patch in a village near Vratsa. It used to belong to a local Thracian royal family. The period of manufacturing was quite a long one, from the 6th to the 4th century BC, the era of the greatest affluence and power of the Thracian culture and the Thracian states on the Balkan Peninsula.
And what is more, the authors from those times give the following account.
Thracian kings did not have only one capital city. The capital was where the king was at the time.
It was there that all taxes went, and foreign missions, as well as everyone who had dealings with the master. It was there that all treasures were put on display and the gifts were given.
Apart from presenting and receiving gifts, the king, of course, had another role in Thracian society.
We can judge about it from the description of Xenophontus about Xuthus II.
He is the first to raise a cup of wine, and when the time comes, begins the dance.
At the receptions and feasts that were a feature of aristocratic everyday life, the figure of the king was always at the center of the attention. The entire ceremony depended on him.
Only he was entrusted with distributing the food and drinks among the guests.
Being a master of ceremony, the king took also the role of a benefactor to everyone present, hence protector of the people, the entire population.
His person was perceived as the center of the universe because the king bestowed life, but also took life.
To the honor of the Thracians, one can say that they fell to Roman power about 2 centuries later than their famous neighbors, Greeks and Macedonians.
One of the reasons for that was the weapons and military strategies they used.
The only rule the light armored Thracians obeyed when fighting was forward and only forward, and all the power focused on the attack. When they retreated, they swung their shields behind their backs for protection.
Or, as Thucydides put it,
they charged forward and then gathered in their usual way of life.
Unlike Helada, the typical armament used by the Thracians was 2 spears.
Homer reported that the leader of the Paeon Thracian Asteropaeus could skillfully use them. He dared Achilles and threw at him both his spears at the same time, because he was very skilled and ambidextrous.
Ever since then, that is, the 13th to the 12th century BC, 2 spears have been associated with the Thracians, and the Thracians depicted on Greek vases are sufficient to confirm that fact.
Depictions on Greek vases and depictions in antique art as a whole show another important thing. Thracians were always overdressed and carried all sorts of jewels and power insignia, whereas the Hellenic warriors were mainly naked.
This was the case because Thracian art treated the balance between man and nature, whereas the Hellenic principle was to compare the man to man or man to God relations.
In this way, 2 completely different systems of views of life are depicted, which presupposes the use of completely different symbols.
Even Heracles was depicted in a manner which departs from the canons of the Hellenic iconography on one of the panegyriste vessels dating from the 4th century BC.
His figure is overdressed, unlike the images in Greece, where he is always naked. He is not in battle at all. He is leading the defeated beast, the Erymanthus boar.
In this case, the most prominent victorious hero in the Hellenic world is just used to illustrate victory and heroism, and the Thracian masters who drew his specific features imparted their own idea of the greatness of the Thracian king.
The might of the king in Thracian art is expressed by the fight between an equestrian and an animal.
The most well-known and impressive portrayal of this scene is from a later period, but the connection with the Thracian iconography is evident. The Madara horseman.
Being one of its kind in Europe, it was proclaimed by UNESCO as a Monument of the World Heritage. It is a relief cut 23 meters high above the foundation of a vertical rock, part of the Madara Plateau. The Madara Plateau was populated as early as the 4th millennium BC.
The theme of the horseman fighting the animal is further developed on dozens of stone tablets scattered around on the entire Thracian territory.
A variation of this battle can be seen on an application from the village of Letnica, near Lovich, from the 4th century BC, where the horseman fights a wolf and a bear.
The Letnica treasure was discovered by chance in 1963 by a group of village workers whilst building a shepherd's hut. A point of interest is the illustrated cycle of life and the deeds of the hero, made from a group of plates. The applications are on display in the Museum of National History in Sofia.
But let's go back to the horseman fighting an animal. Please note that the fight should be between equal opponents, and this is the reason that our hero must fight a lion, a wolf, or a boar.
Regarding the king and his power, the idea is the progress towards the cosmogonic myth of victory of God, or the legendary divine hero over the power of evil and the triumph of the force of good. Victory will bring order and security, and at the same time, it is a metaphor for overcoming death in the name of life. In general, there were two ways for the Thracians to come closer to the gods. Aristocracy established secret societies to perform various rituals and secret mysteries for purification and rising to the level of gods.
The chosen, who came close to the gods, were called mists, meaning the silent ones, as they did not share the secret rituals they were part of with anyone.
We find many valuable pieces of information in the texts of the later Christian authors, who, given their faith, were free from the consecration ban.
Whereas the commoners brought God into them by means of drinking wine and widely accessible Bacchani rituals, which are often seen in the village pubs in the Balkans.
Since to bring God inside yourself was the more accessible form, the other required possessing certain qualities, it was widespread and respectively described by the ancient Greek authors and adopted in the Greek mythology as the Dionysus Bacchanalia.
The most significant written evidence of mass beliefs expressed through the Dionysus Bacchanalias is given by no other than the great Euripides in the tragedy Bacchanalias.
They let their hair fall onto their shoulders,
tied up their nebrids again, and girt on their motley furs snakes that were licking their cheeks.
Others, who had recently given birth and whose breasts were full since they had dropped their children,
took in their hands small deer or small wild wolves and breastfed them with white milk.
One of them gripped the tears, hit the rock, and from the rock sprinkled clear water. Another one threw the tears on the ground, and God sent her a well of wine. At the appointed hour they began to wave their tears in a bacchanalian circle dance, calling in a common voice Dionysus, the son of Zeus. The whole mountain and all the animals began to move in the way the Bacchantes did. There was nothing that was not gripped by the running, and the Bacchantes without weapons fell upon the herd that were grazing. Here you would see how one of them was holding in her hands a cow that had a large udder. Others were tearing to pieces and throwing around heifers. You could see a rib or a hoof being thrown up and down. Hanging on the alder tree, pieces were dripping dingy with blood. Bulls that were previously rampant and prickly, now they were rolling on the ground, thrown down by thousands of maidens' hands with their flesh thrown around.
Dionysus' Bacchanalia are not bound to a certain holy spot. They can take place anywhere without restriction. During the time of the holy orgy, animals are torn apart and their raw meat is eaten, a symbol of divine flesh, Dionysus' flesh.
The idea that if the participants in the ritual have achieved unification with Dionysus, with the divine in this life, they would be able to do so in the next life, is inherent with the mystery rites. Unlike the pre-Greek and Greek tribes, the Thracians believed that life continued after death, that they live in the next world, or in other words,
the king, as well as the common Thracian, could become immortal under certain circumstances. In Hellas, only gods are immortal. It is unthinkable for a mortal to become immortal.
The ancient authors make a connection between the early Thracian religious rites and the Dionysus cult. The name of the god has Thracian etymology and means the son of the heavenly god.
According to Aristophanes and Diodorus,
Dionysus entered Hellas from the north, from the Thracian mountains.
The most impressive monument of the Thracian Dionysus cult is Perperikon, the famous sanctuary of the Satrae tribe, whose ancestors were the Bessi high priests.
it is in the eastern Rhodope Mountains, 15 kilometers northeast from today's town of Kırcalı, on a hill 470 meters high.
With time, the old Dionysus temple grew and an entire palace was built around it. This is precisely what we refer to as the sanctuary palace. Now we're in its courtyard and we have gone through 2 doors and the fortifications more than 2 meters thick. From the courtyard one can enter many other rooms. For instance, the throne palace, where I'm going to go into, via a 5-step staircase with a 2-wing door. It exists even today, only the guards are missing who were there at the door. From here onward is the representative throne hall, and the holes you can see on the sides show that once there were at least 3 more floors. In other words, the palace was not only the part in the rock, but also several floors more. This is it. This is the space which took more than 10,000 square meters only on the ground floor. And further above, there were hundreds of rooms. There were rooms for resting, bedrooms and tombs which were dug into the ground. One of the tombs has 12 caskets in it, the other with 5. They were all looted, unfortunately. And this is why today we can only guess who was buried here, priests or kings. There are also items like this throne, which was cut into the rock. We can see the armrests and the footrest. The priests were sitting here facing east. The entire palace was facing east.
As early as the description of the march of Xerxes against the Hellas in the 5th century BC, Herodotus mentioned the Dionysus prophecy temple.
It was situated on a high peak in the mountains. The Bessi were in charge of the oracle rituals in the sanctuary. A priestess made prophecies exactly as in the Delphian oracle, there was nothing different.
The Thracians worshipped the mother goddess and believed that she had a divine matrimony with the sun.
An illustration of this belief is a cave temple situated in the rocky region of Tangardakaya.
Here, the mother goddess took the shape of a mountain, and her uterus was a cave. The sun fertilized her uterus with his rays.
The cave has the form of a vulva, along the sides of which there is a constant flow of water.
Precisely at high noon, through an opening especially cut in the ceiling, a sun ray penetrates into the hole and is projected onto the floor. A perfectly shaped sun phallus appears, but only during a certain time in the year. When the sun lies low north, it is long enough in order to symbolically fertilize the uterus.
The most detailed and complete portrayal of the Thracian idea of the next world can be found in the tomb of Cousin Luck.
It was discovered by chance in 1944 when digging a gallery for an air shelter. It became famous worldwide with its unique mural paintings and is on the UNESCO's list today.
The burial site contained the remains of a rich Thracian family and shows us a distant world where man was a central figure.
It depicts the so-called burial feast, very similar to the images in the Etruscan tombs. The dead king is with his dearest creatures and things, his beloved wife, the chariot and horses, the weapons and hounds, as well as the servants.
The abundance and royal luxury are connected with the idea of everlasting bliss beyond.
"60 years after the excavation of the Cousin Luck tomb, and not far from it, the Guliama Kosmatka mound, Dr. Kitov found a head which was part of a monumental sculpture of a Thracian ruler.
According to researchers, the prototype was the Odrysi king Xuthus III, who ruled in the 4th century BC.
An elderly man with a thick round beard, a mustache and long hair had been sculpted.
Most likely, similar to the burial practices in other early Mediterranean cultures, the head was severed from the body, performing the function of a guardian of the royal mound.
Items appropriate to his position were placed in the grave hall, representative samples of Thracian art made of gold, more than 1 kilogram, silver, bronze, alabaster, ceramic.
Speaking of the archaeological expedition of Dr. Kitov's in the Valley of Thracian Kings, we cannot but mention the tomb he discovered in 1996 called Shushmanets.
It consists of a burial chamber and a rectangular forechamber with a semi-cylindrical ceiling held up by a Doric column. The central part is supported by an Ionian column used as a constructive element with 7 semi-columns in the dome area.
This tomb is dated 5th to 4th century BC.
In Bulgaria, there are many Thracian mounds, but one of them, the Starosel mound, was preserved in its magnificent entirety and still keeps the Thracian spirit.
The Thracian occult center near Starosel of late 5th, early 4th century BC is the largest discovered Thracian royal complex for the time being. It has a mausoleum. It was researched by Dr. Georgi Kitov in 2000.
The temple has an impressive wall of stone blocks surrounding it, a parade staircase with a corridor and a cult stage. The entrance is surrounded by colourful plates. The inner chamber is a huge, round, dome-shaped chamber with semi-columns and colourful ornaments.
The Thracians were the end of an era in human development.
The rational world of Hellas and the cynicism of Rome have erased the memories about the different world of scriptures, occult gold, mysterious temples, magnificent tombs, medical men and horsemen, kings and gods.
Immersed in myths and interpreted with bias, the traces of the Thracians not only inspire, they challenge the new scholars of human history.
Studying them today is necessary more than ever, because now, when our eyes are tired from focusing on the endless cosmic space, looking for the end of human solitude, when our ears are deafened from listening to the silence of nature, and when our mind has gone numb from thoughts about hopelessness, part of us still knows that only if we find our true past, we will be empowered to save the world and ourselves.